Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I have a very exciting show for you today. I actually teased it on this morning's financial daily update. I have someone that I saw at an event that literally shook the room with his ability to give back, share value, and frankly, I think he's a kindred spirit. So we're going to get to know Pace Morby a little bit more. How you doing this morning, Pace?
Life is so good. I just got back from Disneyland last night, so my life is amazing.
I saw that in some of your pictures, and you went to a Suns preseason game and all of that with the family. You are enjoying life. I see that.
Yeah, life is really, really good.
Well, very, very cool. So we will definitely talk about life, what I call, being happy. That's really what the goal should be. It's not money or things, it's being happy. But we'll get into that. Why don't you introduce the audience to who is Pace Morby and what you do in this little slice of real estate investing?
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. Any chance I can get to talk and maybe help somebody along with their journey with a little bit of information that I have is always something that I get excited about. When I first started, I didn't have somebody, or I didn't have the right podcast. I don't know what it is, but the last 2 years, just these amazing podcasts, yours included, have sprung up. Or maybe it's one of those things where you start, it's like when you buy a Toyota Tacoma and you think you're so cool because you're the only one with Toyota Tacoma, but now you see everybody else has a Toyota Tacoma. It might be one of those things where you start watching podcasts and now you're in that channel. But when I first started, I didn't have somebody that I could really go to, somebody that I felt like if I had an answer, if I had a question, I couldn't just pick up a phone and get an answer to it. And so a big part of our mission at our company is being those people. Somebody calls us and says, "Oh my gosh, I don't have a proof of funds. What do I do?" We help them out with that. Or somebody says, "I don't know what to say inside of a buyer appointment." And we go, "Great, just come to a buyer appointment with us. Let's go together." So I appreciate you having me on the show. Primarily what I would say we do is wholesale real estate. I'd say that is what I call standing in the river. And, you get a lot of real estate investors, whether they're realtors or passive investors, they just say, "Well, how do you get so many deals?" Or "How do you guys get looks at so many deals?" And I said, well, you are a passive investor, and that's like standing on the river on the side and casting your lure in the river. And you're, every once in a while you're catching a good fish. But as a wholesaler, I'm standing in the river with a net. I get way more opportunities. I see way more deals. I meet way more people. And that's just my full-time deal. And in that endeavor of being a wholesaler, we do, I'd say, anywhere between 12 to 20 wholesale deals a month, depending on what time of year. December, it slows down. July, we'll do 20, 23, 24 wholesale deals. But in that endeavor, I happened upon subject to transactions, I guess is the best way to do it. A little bit more long-term, a good way to acquire a ton of properties with zero money out of your pocket. And we've gone gangbusters on that. And now locally in my local market, I would say that people consider us more subject to investors than wholesalers, even though wholesale is still probably 70% of what we do.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I definitely wanted to get you on, frankly, selfish reasons, because I believe we are at the top of the real estate cycle, right? I've been doing this almost 20 years.
Right.
And when, I don't know, I'll call it equity spreads get collapse on owner occupants, you need other ways to help people. And,
right.
It was very clear in just the listing you gave there, but even the more services you offered up to help people and being of service and really being more interested in helping the person on the other side of the kitchen table, if you will, was pretty important. So we'll definitely get into the subject to conversation. That'll probably be a big chunk of this, but I want to make sure everybody knows who Pace is first. Obviously a very successful wholesaler and business owner today, but where does Pace's journey start, right? Did you just roll out of bed and start wholesaling houses? Or, I mean, where does this whole thing begin?
I wish that's what it was. My wife and I were having dinner last night, and she looked at me and she goes, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Man, I wish I could just invent a time machine." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And I go, "I wish I could have gone back and started my real estate journey 10 years earlier, knowing what I know now." And I'm sure you feel the exact same way, where you just say, "Man, if I just knew how to pick up rentals and had to do all these other types of investments, I would have never done the other things prior to this. Yeah. But the way I started is I started in a big family, a lot of personalities, trying to navigate each one of those. 8 sisters, 3 brothers, Mormon family, hardworking. You know, my dad taught us how to work really, really hard, not necessarily very, very smart. And on stage, I talked about that the other day, is that my dad taught me a lot, but he never taught me how to be smart. And here my dad is at 63, still working in construction, owns a construction business. And so naturally, when I got home from Korea, I went on a Mormon mission. When I got home from Korea after 2 years, I immediately jumped into construction, which was my introduction to housing. And then I started doing that. And I put myself through college being a contractor, and then landed some really big contracts with companies like Open Door and OfferPad, some really big companies, and made really good money. But I essentially was just watching other people. As I was busy managing 160 to 180 employees, I was busy watching other people make real estate investments, and my construction company was the group that would beautify and improve these properties. So technically, we were doing physically way more challenging work than the people who were investing, but the people who were investing were using their brains, and we weren't. And so in 2006, luckily, 2016. So I haven't even been doing this that long, but in 2016, I finally said, I need to change. Hey, Scott, how's it going? I need to change my focus. And so in 2016, we jumped into wholesale.
Okay.
And I ran a $15 million a year construction company and did, 8 to 10 wholesale contracts a month for about 2 years. That went on straight for about 2 years. In 2018, so last year, I ran across Subject 2, and I went to gurus, I went to seminars, I went to people local in my own market that were kind of respected as people that were really good at those types of transactions. And I couldn't find anybody that could articulate and explain Subject 2 to me in any regard. And so I had a little bit of cash. And so I just told myself, you know what? I'm going to go do a few Subject 2 transactions, and I'm going to screw them up. And I just know that by taking action, I'm going to learn some massive, massive lessons that I can't learn from anybody else. And I think what was going on is that I was fearful of the paperwork and the title work and all the weird, things that salesmen are not great at, that I was not taking action. And instead I was spending money and having people educate me on things that I should have just jumped into a lot earlier. So I bought my first Subject 2 a year ago this month. And what happened is I still to this day make $660 a month on that deal. And I thought I was going to screw it all up, and I didn't. Wow. Hey, come on in. I'm on this call for a little bit, but if you want to go back and chat with, Cody, my partner? Perfect. So I have a ride along. I give people ride alongs every day here in Maricopa County, where people get to go on a day in a life every single day. They get to go to my appointments. They sit down with my attorney. We go to the bank, we go to the title company, we go to a seller appointment, we go visit my assisted living facilities, we go look at rentals or construction projects. So today, that's Howard, he just showed up for the morning. So anyway, I thought I screwed up my first deal, and every single month on the 2nd of the month, I get a check for $660 deposited in my account from a servicing company. And I learned a lot through that, which was take action. And now, to bring it all up to today, in September, because obviously we haven't closed out October, but in September, we purchased 17 Subject 2s, which we will keep all of them long-term. And we are already to 10 Subject 2 contracts for October. So our goal as a company is to acquire 10 Subject 2 deals every single month for the next 5 years. And get to a point where we're between 600 and 700 Subject 2 deals that are owned and rented out.
Yeah. So there's two things I want to talk about. So I'm going to share them now. We'll go any order you want. I want to break down that first deal a little more detail, how you found it, how you stumbled through it, how it
Yeah.
ended with the $660 a month. So we'll break that deal down in its entirety. And then I
Perfect.
want to talk about, okay, I love the goal of subject to, again, because you're keeping, right? One of the things that you often, I don't know, at least I often feel for wholesalers that are in the river, if you will, to use your analogy, is yes, they're catching fish, but they're eating it as fast as they can. It's still a job. What you're
Great point.
doing is you're in the river and you're putting the fish, or you're freezing them, or whatever the correct analogy is, putting them in a pond so they can have more babies, whatever it is, and you're keeping them all. I have not talked to somebody who would call them a wholesaler and they keep everything. That's kind of almost an oxymoron, right? Like jumbo shrimp.
Right.
A wholesaler that keeps everything. So we're going to have to talk about that. So why don't we break down the first deal kind of in more detail, because I think people want to, the first one's always interesting. So how'd you find it? How'd you stumble across it?
Well, I found it by, I'm going to even put this on my a whiteboard here in a minute, but
okay.
I found it by going to a local meetup, a real estate meetup where, my deal, and this is for anybody that's listening, people always wonder, how do I get my first deal? What do I do? Where do I go? And they assume they've got to have this big system in place and they've got to spend all this money to get their first wholesale deal. But what I do is I just go to meetups that other people are organizing, because I'm a social butterfly, but I don't want to be the guy organizing the social activity, if that makes sense.
It does.
So I just go to everybody else's meetups. Usually it's like one a week, sometimes 2 a week. But what happens is I go to these meetups and I go to people and I say, hey, what are you working on? How can I help you? Or, hey, do you have any deals I can take a look at? Instead of you walking up to people and saying, hey, what do you do? And I just assume everybody in that room is a wholesaler or a real estate investor. So I just asked the question of, well, what do you have that I can look at? So I walked right up to a buddy of mine. His name is Jamil. He was actually on the stage the other day in Houston as well.
Yep, I remember.
I walked up to Jamil in this real estate meetup. It was Steve Trang's meetup. He has it every month on the third Thursday of the month. Mm-hmm. And I walk up to Jamil and I said, hey, Jamil, what do you have that I can look at? And he says, oh, hey, I've got a subject to deal. And I know you've been trying to get into that world. And I see you going to coaching and all that stuff. But why don't I send you the details on that? I haven't sent it out to our list yet. And so he sends me a couple pieces of information right there, just via text. We're standing next to each other and he's texting me. Mm-hmm. And I look at it and I go, wow, their payment. And I didn't know what I know now, but here's basically the breakdown of the deal. Let me see if I can turn this bad boy around. So the PITI, which is exactly where you want to start. People always send me the value of the house and the ARV. And I honestly don't care about the ARV. I don't care about that. I mean, yes, at the end of the day, do I care about the equity of the deal? Yeah, of course. But the foundation of a subject to deal is always the PITI. What is my payment that I'm taking over, right? Mm-hmm. So the payment I took over on this particular deal, the name of the house is Virginia, still own it. And again, I make $660 every single month net. Obviously that's EBITDA. That's before I pay taxes and all that stuff, but mm-hmm. That's my income. So PITI on Virginia was $890 for a 3-bed, 2-bath house. And I'm thinking, are you freaking kidding me? That's such a great deal. Mm-hmm. And he's like, yeah, man, it's a great deal. Well, here's what I found out. This is where the challenge of the deal came in, okay? Mm-hmm. So the next thing you want to know once you know PITI is what can you rent that for? Because you want to find out what your spread is. Well, I found out I could rent that for $1,450 was my, at the time, the spread that I had, okay? Mm-hmm. That's what I thought I had. Well, here's the caveat, and here's, here you go. What's that spread? That's $560 a month. And you can see that I originally penciled out $560, but I ended up getting $660. Okay. So I decided I wanted to do this deal. So I committed to it via text message. Then I found out the next day that I had to come up with $21,900 in cash to do the deal. And I said, oh my gosh, what's that $21,000 for? Mm-hmm. Well, here's what it's for. And this is the other thing as a subject to investor, you got to really look at is what are the arrears? Because a lot of times subject to deals, people are behind on their payments. So the arrears, I think, were 15 grand. The fee to the seller, I think the seller took 2,000. And then the wholesaler who brought it to me, they ended up taking, I think, 3,000. And then I had to have closing costs on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And all of this added up to be $21,900. Well, now I've been doing this long enough that I know that that's actually not the full amount of money that I had to bring to the table, because this house needed to be cleaned up, renovated, etc. So I learned some really, really nasty lessons along the way. So I brought $21,900 to the table. Okay, I brought that to title. This is over maybe the course of 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens is that $21,900, I took that out of my cash flow thinking, okay, no problem. I'll pull that out. This will be a good investment. I'll make $560 a month based on a $21,000 investment. I mean, cash on cash return, that's a great return.
Yep.
So I look at that, and then I realize that the title company is trying to call me, and they're calling me to tell me that they called the reinstatement for this on the arrears, and the arrears were no longer 15 grand. The arrears were $20,000. This happened, and honestly, out of all of our deals, we've got a board. We've got 61 houses in escrow.
61?
61, yeah.
All subject to?
No, I'd probably say 20 of those, maybe 25 are subject to.
Okay, cool. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, don't be. So on these deals on subject to, this happens 90% of the time we do a deal. The arrears and the reinstatement comes back higher. So $5,000 was added. Mm-hmm. And then I found out that he was behind on the HOA, $2,000. Then I realized, oh my gosh, the house needs $8,000 in work. So here I am learning a really hard lesson that I need to now come up with $36,900.
Yep.
So here's what I did. I originally was going to rent the property out, and I was going to keep my $21,000 in the deal, taking over a payment of $890, making $560 a month. Mm-hmm. Then what I realized is, oh my gosh, well, I can find what I call a penalty box buyer. Okay, a penalty box buyer would be somebody that has cash but can't get approved for a loan. So we have a big database of those people. The way that we typically find them, if you want to go into this, like dispositioning to a penalty box buyer, we can go into that later if you choose to. Okay. But honestly, the best way to find these buyers that have this kind of cash to come in and take over a payment of $1,450, they're all over the place. We find them typically Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, etc. Or we spend probably about $1,000 a month just putting bandit signs around town that say owner to owner financing, easy qualify, no credit check, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
So I found a buyer. Here's what's so cool. I found a buyer that only had $26,000. So that she didn't have all this money. Okay. She had $26,000. That's all she had. Her name is Maria. She currently lives in the property.
Pace, just real quick, I want to get the timing right. So are you still in that 2 or 3 week escrow, or have you closed already?
Right. I have not closed escrow yet.
Okay. You haven't closed and you found Maria. Okay, go ahead.
Right. So I found Maria. The way I found Maria was a real estate agent named Yvette. So I reached out to Yvette on Facebook and I said, hey, I know you have a lot of Hispanic buyers, not trying to be racist, but it seems to be in Maricopa County that a lot of Hispanic blue collar plumbers, electricians, et cetera, they have a ton of cash, but they can't buy a house. Mm-hmm. So Yvette brings Maria to me. Maria's husband's a plumber and he can't get approved for a loan, but they had $26,000 in cash. Okay. Well, I need $36,000 to make this deal work. Otherwise I've got to sink, the difference of my cash in the deal.
Sure.
What I did is I went to Maria and I said, hey, if you can come up to $28,900 and you can figure out where to get that other $2,900, and I don't have to redo the repairs on the house and you just take the house over as is, then I will not require you to pay the 36 grand. We can work on something at 28,900. She pays the arrears, the fees to the seller, the fees to the wholesaler. She pays the closing costs. Mm-hmm. She pays the extra $5,000 in arrears, and she pays the $2,000 to the HOA. Mm-hmm. But we don't have to do any repairs. Mm-hmm. I will let her move in for $28,900 down.
Yep.
And what I did is I ended up renting it to her for $1,550.
Gotcha.
And she jumped all over that. She was looking for something that was under $1,600. They had been living 20 years in a rental. They had never owned a property in their life. And so we were able to get them into under what they were looking for with $28,900 down. And it was funny. She said, well, I only have $26,000. And I know what that means. It means I only want to spend $26,000. I only want to spend $26,000. Doesn't mean that's all I have. So I pushed her on this a little bit. Got her into the property. I bought the property, just so you know the equity. I bought the property for $151 plus the $26,000 basically, or actually $28,900 to get the deal put together. So I was into the deal $179,900. Oops.
What extra zero?
And I sold this to her on term. I ended up seller financing it to her. So she's already approved. It's her house. She holds title. She's on record, all that kind of stuff. And I'm just in the deal as the lender. So this is not typically how I like to do them now. I do them in a way that I make a lot more money, but this was my first deal. So I sold this to her for $219,900. So I built in a nice little piece of equity in there for myself. So I've got equity. So let's say that she refinances me out.
Right.
Let's say in 6 months she refinances me out. I get that difference in a big lump sum. But in the time being, I'm getting the difference between the $890 payment and the $1,550. I'm making $660 a month, and a servicing company is the one that pays me.
Very cool. So again, to kind of summarize what I take from that, first off, these can be done in a very short time frame. You found an opportunity just by being open and being that social butterfly, to use your term.
Right.
Then you reached out actively to what people would call the buyer side or disposition. You listened to all the parties, and you didn't let any surprises take you down, because a lot of people see those, extra $5,000, extra $2,000 HOA, and they just freak out. Right.
Right.
You expect it now. And then, you got the deal done. Two things. First, I think in the beginning you said you charged a rent of $1,550. That is not rent. That's a payment.
That is correct. I'm sorry. It's just, it's a payment. So she is financed. It is a mortgage. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The title company created a note. She pays on that note.
Very cool. Yeah. In this example, it sounds like you do it differently today, but let's finish this one up. So at this point, you have built-in equity because of the spread, like 180 to 220 round numbers. Is it a 30-year? Like, do you built in
30-year? Well, it's actually, we did a mirror. So I financed it so that when she pays me off, the underlying mortgage is paid off. So it's the mortgage is only 2 years old.
Okay. So
she has 28 years. Yeah.
Okay. Very cool. So then now let's step back and pretend to be either side. So the seller, right, who sold it to you, the subject to side, how were they impacted, right? They basically, they have to believe that you're going to make their underlying payment because they're still on that first mortgage, right? Correct?
Right.
So how does one go about getting someone to trust you, Pace? You're a good looking guy, you're really social, but at the end of the day, they got to trust you, right?
Right. I think the biggest thing is just, I went on a buy appointment the other night, and I took a kid named Jacob Schaefer to the appointment. And in 27 minutes, we were out of the house, and we had a commitment from the seller. And Jacob says to me, he's like, how did you do that? And I go, well, you just watched me.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, happened so fast. I almost had no idea what was going on. And I said, Jacob, when you go on a date with a girl, whether it's your wife or before you got married, did you have a script? Did you sit down in the booth at the restaurant? Were you looking down at your hand as to like what to talk about? And he goes, no, because I would have sounded stupid.
Yeah.
I said, it's the same thing with talking to a seller. It really is you should be talking to that seller like you're on a date. Get to know them, understand what they're trying to do, because if some girl you're on a date with says, I never want to have kids, you're not going to continue with that conversation because you're a guy that wants kids. And he goes, yeah, that makes sense. But how does that tie in? And I said, well, it's the same thing with the seller. Did you see what I did there in the appointment? I said, Mario was the name of the seller we met with the other night. And I said, Mario, what is it that you want at the end of the day? And he's like, I want the highest number I can get. And I go, that's not what you want. That's what you think you want. I want to understand, in 2 weeks, let's say you get $1 million for this $200,000 house. You now have the number you want. Where are you? What house do you live in? What part of town is that in? Blah, 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 blah. I went through the whole deal. And Mario says, man, nobody's ever asked me these questions. I guess I really haven't thought about it. And I said, well, it's really important for me that I solve all your problems and I solve, your wish list. If I can't accomplish that, then there's no point in me buying your house. And he goes, are you serious? I go, yeah, I've done over 400 wholesale transactions, and there's never been a seller I bought a house from that I didn't feel like I solved a major problem. And there's no script. I'm literally saying all this stuff to Mario, the seller. Like, I'm telling him straight up, yeah, I've done all this stuff, and every single person I'm solving problems for. So I'm just looking for the problem you need me to solve. And after about 2 minutes, Mario says, well, I actually don't want to sell my house. I go, there you go. You've met with 12 other people, and you're just trying to get the highest and best, which means you're trying for something else. It's not just the number, because I'm sure somebody's giving you a stupid number. Out of 12 wholesalers that came in here, I guarantee there's been a newbie that gave you way too much money. You didn't sign with them. So what was it? What were you looking for he didn't give you? And he goes, well, I actually want to stay in my house, and I want to do this, and I want to do a loan mod, and I want blah, blah, blah. The conversation went forward, and we ended up getting him actually into a subject to transaction. But I told Jacob when we left, I said, Jacob, the goal is to find out what everybody actually wants and to find out how do we make it so everybody gets that. So on Virginia, the subject to that I took over, the seller's name is Jesus. I wasn't the person who originally contracted him. I bought it from another wholesaler, but obviously I'm the one that now is in a long-term 28-year relationship with Jesus. So I have met with him and had multiple conversations with him. The way that they got him under contract is that he lost his wife. She had an accident. She passed away. And he fell behind on payments because he relied on both his income and her income in order to make the payments. So he's not a bad guy. He just had some bad things happen. And so what that wholesaler did is he went to the table and he said, I will catch up. I'll give you cash in your pocket. We'll keep you out of foreclosure. And honestly, in subject to, it's not so much about trust right out of the gate. It's about what you're giving them in value. And are you solving their problems? And can you articulate properly? And are you listening to them? And so that's the thing, is just like going on a date with a girl. If you go in there and you start talking about yourself and you start talking about all your accomplishments and you're sitting there in your first date, the girl's like, this guy's an idiot. Right? And it's seriously the same thing. So sitting down with Mario or sitting down with the seller Jesus on Virginia and understanding, what are you trying to accomplish? How can I help? And you haven't even brought up price on the house. That's what I do in every appointment. That's why my conversion rate is very high. People will flat out say, well, just name your price. And I'll say, my price needs to be based on the value that I give you.
Right.
And if my only value is a price, then maybe you and I shouldn't do business together, because that doesn't vibe with who I am.
Right.
And sellers really do appreciate that. And I think a lot of wholesalers forget that that's what our business model is. Our business model is solving people's problems at a high level and therefore getting paid for it. So Jesus's problems were, I'm behind on my payments. I'm going to lose my house to foreclosure. I have nowhere to go and I have no cash in my pocket to get to anywhere to go. So all of those problems were solved. Somebody gave him cash. Somebody let him stay in the property. After I closed escrow, we let him stay in the property for 30 days, rent free, saved his house from foreclosure. And now those payments that are being made are rebuilding his credit from while he was in foreclosure. His credit took a hit, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's Anna. Anna's been with me for 5-6 years. She's awesome.
I thought she, looks like she had a check too.
You have a check? Oh, she does have a check.
Yes.
She has a check for $900 from a seller that is not moving out of the house that we closed escrow on like a week ago. Closed escrow like 2 weeks ago, and they're still in the property. And so they've been paying us $150 a day till they get out.
There you go.
And I stupidly was like trying to be Mr. Nice Guy. Like, oh yeah, I trust you. You'll get out. I don't need any money in escrow. And so Anna's been having to hound this tell her for this $150 every weekend.
That's funny.
And did they get the 250-pound turtle out of the house?
They did. Tortoise.
Are they getting the van out today?
They got it out yesterday.
Oh, they got it out. Sweet. So you know how it is. Real estate investing is awesome.
Awesome.
So yeah, Jesus's problems are solved. And then on our other side, Maria, the lady who ended up buying the property, I mean, 20 years of renting a property. She had no ownership, no equity, nothing to pay down, nothing to call her own. And meanwhile, her husband, who's a plumber, is working his guts out, trying to support his family. And he's for 20 years has been paying rent. And so we solved a major problem for them, is that now another 20 years goes by, they're going to basically own that house, have equity and have savings and have an actual investment rather than just renting from a landlord, which is fine too. But you know, the American dream is home ownership, right?
Yep, for sure. Very, very cool. That's a great story. I'm really glad we broke it down into that details. But the next thing comes around is, it sounds like if you were to do that deal today, you would do the exit differently. It doesn't sound like the purchase side would be much different. It's the exit that would be different.
Yeah, let me break a deal down for you real quick that we just closed escrow on last week, and this will show you exactly what we do now.
Okay.
So I bought a property on 223rd, has 3 acres, nice horse property. That actually does mean something. Horse property owners typically will pay a little bit more than market rent if they can have their horses there, because they don't have to board them anywhere else, right?
Makes sense. Okay.
So this is a 4-bed, 3-bath. I took over payments on this deal at $1,500 a month. Unbelievable. We are renting this deal out. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say renting. We are now doing primarily lease options, and I'll kind of break down how we bring the money in and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. We are lease optioning this at $2,950 a month.
Well, that doesn't suck, but okay, go ahead.
That does not suck at all. So the deal on 223rd is we took over a mortgage payment at $1,500. We already have a lease optionee that's going to move in there. They are paying us a $15,000 option fee. And I'll tell you where that goes and where that comes from in just a second. Mm-hmm. How we got into this deal is on 223rd, she was behind $18,000 in arrears. We paid her $12,000 originally. And I'll tell you what happened. We went back and renegotiated her to $7,000 because this went up 10 grand when we did the reinstatement. My renovation on the deal is $10,000. Then my closing costs, I always put $2,500, even though it's always lower than that, but I always earmark. Mm-hmm. And then I have a disposition guy that I pay $1,000 a month to. Mm-hmm. Not $1,000 a month, $1,000 a deal. Mm-hmm. And he gets paid out of escrow, and then basically whatever he doesn't use from that $1,000 is what he keeps to himself. Just a little. I hate collecting money just to pay it out to somebody.
Yeah.
So I'd rather just have my dispo guy get $1,000, and then he has to pay for like Facebook marketing ads and Craigslist ads and all that stuff out of the $1,000.
Perfect.
And then he gets to keep whatever's left.
Mm-hmm.
So that's closing, and then that's to reno. So that's kind of how I break down a deal. Those 5 things really need to be considered. And if somebody else brought the deal to me, I would pay typically a $2,500 finder's fee, but we didn't have that on this deal.
Okay.
So those are the things to take into consideration. People need to understand you're taking over. This is how you underwrite the deal. Take over. You need to get the mortgage statement of what the payment's going to be, PITI. Mm-hmm. You now figure out what can you lease that for? What are the market rents in that area? Mm-hmm. And then you start breaking down what my cost is. So my cost on this deal is basically $43,500 is what it cost me to get into this deal.
Okay.
So where does that money come from if I'm not going to dispo it the same way that I dispoed it to Maria?
Right.
What I did here is I brought in a second lender. This lender came in with 8% interest only money. So typically these are people that have 401ks that are not performing. They don't really have any, they have, anywhere between $100,000 to $500,000 in cash that's not making them any money anywhere. And they're not in the real estate game. And so they're sitting there saying, I need to at least outbeat inflation and make a little bit of money. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. So I raised $43,500. Let me look at my payment to them real quick. So I take 43,500. I multiply that by 0.08. That's $3,480 a year divided by 12. My payment to that lender is $290 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically, you take your $1,500, you add your $290, and that is now my new payment. $1,790 a month is my new payment to stay in that deal.
Yep.
Now, the reason I do it this way is because in this option of the lease option, I don't just get my cash flow.
Right.
I get my equity. We get that on the seller finance side that we did with Maria as well. We get equity.
Mm-hmm.
On this deal, just so you understand our equity, we took over a $259,000 payment loan, and we are selling this on lease option for $459,000. We have massive equity here.
Yeah.
We basically bought into this deal about $200,000 in equity on this deal. Insane.
Now, just real quick, because the 459 is, in fairness, your number, right? That's what you're making the lease option at. What would you think the fair market value would be like? Could you list it on the MLS for 459 today? Okay.
I could list it today for 400.
Gotcha.
The reason I sell it at 459 is because on the lease option,
mm-hmm.
the lease option, we give them 5 years to execute.
No, I totally get it. Okay, cool.
And so we give them a price that we think it will reasonably be at some point in the next 5 years.
Gotcha.
And that's where that number comes from.
Perfect. Understood.
So we built in, so technically, let's say just on market value, we've got 150,000 in equity as of today.
Yep. Day one. Yep. Got it.
Day one, big equity. I mean, our company last month grew in net worth about $500,000 based on the houses that we bought just last month.
Not a bad month.
Not a bad month. Then you've got our cash flow. So let's go over that real quick. We're at $1,790 and we're renting that out for $2,950. So our cash flow is $1,200 a month,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Now, here's what's cool about lease options is I keep the pay down on the first mortgage.
Correct.
So on this $1,500, our pay down on this $1,500, because of how far it is into the amortization schedule,
mm-hmm.
the pay down on this is about $750 a month.
Yep. That's yours to keep. Yep.
That's ours to keep, right? It's just a little, we call this our little silent savings account.
Yeah. Because it's not really cash, but it is absolutely, I don't know what you want to call it, value you'll receive at some point. Yeah. Silent savings.
Yeah. It's just a silent savings. You kind of forget that it's even there and it just continues to build your equity technically,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
So
right.
Our equity will continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Then here's the other thing that we get. We get the depreciation.
Ah, because you stay the owner. Yep.
We are the owner, so we get to keep the depreciation, which is there's some massive tax benefits in that.
Heck yeah. Yep.
Now, I think the coolest part about this, I know that this equity part is really cool. The cash flow is cool. The pay down is very, very cool. That's one of the biggest benefits of doing it this way, bringing in a second lender. But the depreciation, that's cool. A lot of people are bored with that. They don't really care. They don't understand that properly. But here's the coolest part about this. 80% of our lease optionees, the people who come in and do lease options,
mm-hmm.
will never execute their lease.
Right.
I'm sorry, they'll never execute their option.
Correct. Yeah.
The benefit of that is because I make them a lease option owner, I do not have to mess with repairs.
Yep.
I give them a 30-day window. When they come into our deal, they have 30 days for a warranty, and then all repairs from that point forward during their lease option are their responsibility.
Nice.
So I'm not technically, I don't have to manage this like I do a rental,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the other really, really cool thing is that a lot of wholesalers that are not keeping their properties, the reason being is because they don't have upfront cash. They have to pay this big beast of employees and overhead and all that stuff, which is why they're wholesalers and they have to keep chasing that next deal.
Mm-hmm.
What's cool here is that our lease option buyer is bringing $15,000 to the table. Where does that $15,000 go?
Mm-hmm.
I don't use it to pay down my second lender. A lot of people will say, oh, well, you're going to go pay down your second lender.
Nope.
No, I'm not, because my second lender wants that 8% churning and burning for them. They want that money.
Yep.
they don't want me paying that down. They want to stay in the deal. So we take that 15 grand and we make that money up front, which is how we pay payroll, how I buy sushi, how I pay car payments, and all that kind of stuff.
That's nice.
And so this was a deal that it's so surprising to me that nobody wanted this deal.
And now, why do you think that is?
wholesaler.
Let's kick that around. Why do you think that was? Because the repairs, because it was horse property. I mean, what were they looking at that you went, oh my God, you guys are idiots. You're leaving 6 figures on the table, nearly $1,000 a month in income plus pay down. What were they missing?
Well, here's the thing that you and I will probably both agree with. When you're talking to sellers, let's say that their foreclosure date starts here. So they start foreclosure here, and their finish date is here.
Yeah.
This is the day they lose their house. If you go along the reality timeline, what happens is right around here, the seller thinks that they can sell the house for 400 grand. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not like, and I'll tell you another story here in a second, but I'll tell you the story because it'll answer both. So I have a seller, his name's Graham. This just happened about 2 months ago. I met Graham right here about 1 week before foreclosure. This is about, I'd say this is the day that reality sets in, is right here. So I meet him about a week before the foreclosure. I'd say reality sets in about 10 days before. And all the things they were doing along this timeline, loan modifications, meeting with realtors, meeting with wholesalers, investors, fix and flippers, all the time they've spent here was basically getting an education that the reality was they weren't going to get the exact number they thought and set out to do. So we bought his house on terms. It's a VA loan. And he asked me, we came in, we gave him cash. We paid his arrears. We let him stay in the house for 2 months. So he's still there right now. I drive by there like once a week. He's still in there for another, I'd say 30 days, something like that. And then, let's see, what else did we give him? That's it. We solved all his problems, but we got his house at a price basically that he was originally trying to sell the house for. He was trying to sell the house for $220 on the MLS, but the house is only worth like 200 on the MLS. Well, not 200. So here's the challenge. If he sold it for 220, which is about what the MLS would be, he would have to cut a check for $10,000 to close on his house.
Yeah. The net. Yep.
Right. So he didn't have that 10,000. So he was getting offers, but he couldn't make it happen. So Graham asked me, we come in here, we basically buy the house from him. I think we bought it for 210, which is what he owed. Plus I gave him cash. So I technically probably ended up paying 220 for a house that's only worth 210 as of today. But that's not important to me. Equity is cool. I love equity, right? We get a lot of equity in a lot of deals, but on a deal where our VA loan is like $1,300 and my payment that I can rent it out for is $2,100. I don't really care if I have equity or not. I have cash flow. Right. I basically bought cash flow here. So Graham asked me a question and he says, where were you 2 months ago? And my answer to him was, Graham, you don't remember me, but I met you right here 2 months ago. Wow. And he goes, I never met with you. I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, Graham, I was the guy that was wearing cargo shorts that you were making fun of me because I was wearing cargo shorts. Do you remember that? He goes, oh my gosh, that was you? And I said, Graham, I gave you this option 2 months ago and you would have walked away with more cash. But what happens is 2 months of payments went along. I had more arrears to catch up. And I told you that. And he goes, oh my gosh, now it makes sense to me. Oh my gosh, now I remember. I go, remember I told you, hey, Graham, if you don't sell the house to me now, you won't be able to sell it to anybody else because there's no equity. And in 2 months, I'm not going to be able to give you the same offer because now I have more arrears to catch up. And he goes, oh my gosh, you're so right. And so that's the problem. And that's the answer, is that a lot of times sellers are in the reality timeline. They are stuck in here, and everybody giving them good options and good ability, like good numbers. The seller just thinks their house is worth too much, or their people are lowballing me and blah, 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 blah. And so this is kind of the area where we get a ton of subject to deals, is because finally reality sets in, and all the investors and all the wholesalers and real estate agents now in a week, they can't do anything.
Yeah.
They can't. And
No,
so
you're
on
right.
this deal, we funded this in cash the day we didn't fund it the day, but I went in and reinstated. We got the house under contract on Friday, and Monday I reinstated his loan and got him good.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody can move that fast. That is actually, if you're a wholesaler,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to go sink $20,000 in cash to catch up his arrears, give him money, pay for closing costs,
Mm-hmm.
because you only have a week to dispo that house.
Right.
But for me, we're keeping the property. So we went and reinstated the house and put a contract together. We recorded escrow and all that kind of stuff. We were able to do that in 3 days. And I didn't actually have a lender on this yet. I had my own personal cash. So we put cash in there, and then we refinanced our cash out with another investor.
Very cool.
If that makes sense.
Oh, it totally does. So again, I just want to summarize for the audience what we saw with your first deal and how you would do it today. Either example, Maria or Jesus. I forget the second name.
Yeah.
Oh,
Maria's the first person I did. Jesus the second.
Perfect. So what happened there is in either case.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Jesus was the seller. Maria was the buyer on my back end. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I got all confused. But anyways, in the first deal you did and how you would do them now, you're really creating deals where you have no out-of-pocket cash. Whether
Yeah. And I get people that are like, man, I even have investors that say, well, how much money do you have tied up? And I say, even though it's a considerable amount of cash, I even sold one of my assisted living facilities recently to take the cash out of that and put it into subject to.
Mm-hmm.
But my answer to my investors is not even an honest answer. They ask, how much money do you have tied up in your own subject to stuff? If you believe in it so much, you should probably have your own money in there. And my answer, even though I've got several $100,000 in there, my answer to them is zero.
Right.
I tell them zero. And the reason for that is I want to prove a point. And I say, I'm scaling my business. I'm growing this. Mm-hmm. And I can't scale a business by putting my own cash in it. I can only scale a business by giving other people opportunities to make money for their family. So, they joke around. They go, really? You don't have any money in your own deals? I go, of course I do. But if I told you, yes, some investors go, well, why don't you if these are such great deals, why don't you fund them yourself? Well, because I'm going to buy 1/10 of the amount of houses that I can utilizing somebody else's money.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So I spend probably 5 hours a week raising private capital. It's a big part of what I do.
Very cool. Well, on that line, clearly you have a system in place. How can people get a hold of you, follow you, ask more questions, ride alongs, potentially be a private investor? How can people find out more about PACE and what PACE is doing?
My Instagram is really the main thing. I don't teach, I don't coach, I don't have anything to sell. There's two things that we do to help people, and one of them is doing daily ride-along. So if somebody decided, hey, I want to know what it feels like, there's a paradigm shift, I think, when you read it, listen to it, watch it on YouTube, and then when you actually go and see it in person, you go, oh my gosh, this is what it actually feels like to be an investor, and this is what a day-to-day operation looks like, and holy moly, you guys do actually work 14 and 16-hour days. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So we try and give that experience to as many people as we can. What we get out of it is, number one, emotional income of just feeling good about helping people. And number two, I'd say 1 out of 10 of those people end up being, somebody that brings a deal to us at some point in the future. And we want to make sure that they bring us deals that make sense for us. And so windshield time is a really great way to educate people on the business and also what we can do together. And then number two is we have a Sunday night call I call it Sunday service, where we just tell people, here's the deals we did last week. Here's how we got them. Here's how we break down every one of our KPIs, how we talked to the seller, what problem we solved, how much money we made, all that kind of stuff. And then we open it up to a Q&A, and that's a free call. It's every Sunday, Arizona time, 7 p.m. So if you want to get in touch with me directly, I would go on Instagram. It's PaceJMorby. DM me on there and I'll communicate. Somebody on my team will set up a ride along with you. And I'm currently booked out 6 weeks in advance. I think I have a little bit over 30 people already in line. And every single day, somebody just shows up to my office that somebody else booked, and they jump in my Prius. We drive around all day, go to appointments, and I show them exactly what it's like to be an investor every day.
Very, very cool, man. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you giving us roughly an hour. This is exactly what I hope.
We went through an hour that fast?
Almost. Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, man. Any last words for the people watching this that are still hanging tight with us?
Yeah, you know what? My thing is about subject to, and why it's so exciting is that it doesn't mean stop doing wholesale. In fact, I came into the office this morning at 6, and I was talking to my partner Cody about our wholesale business and how we want to double down on a few things. Wholesale is an amazing business, but it's a job, right? And you alluded to that at the beginning. Of it's a high paying job, but you have to continually chase that money. And after doing 400 transactions or so, I look back at those transactions and how much money I would have made if I just kept one out of, 5 of those deals along the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
I would have made so much more money. So as a wholesaler, I try and challenge other people that are in wholesale. Every time you do 5 wholesale transactions, you need to be buying a rental or a subject to. And in the very least, it should be 1 out of 10. You should be doing 10% of your deals need to be a rental or subject to, where you're building equity, you're building cash flow. Because I met a guy, this is my last thing I'll say. I met a guy named Jack Martin. He was a guy here local in Phoenix. Nobody knows him anymore because he kind of fizzled out of wholesale. And he told me 2 years ago, he said, and he is a legit guy. He said, I was one of the biggest wholesalers in town. And after 5 years of doing it, I had 35 employees and I was making, all this money, but I had no idea where it was. And it was constantly going back into the marketing mechanism. And I stopped one day and decided to take a month off and go to Europe with my family. And about halfway through my trip, I realized that my team needed me every single day. I had to babysit. And then I come back home from Europe and I realized that I just had a job. And that if I was gone for a month, the whole company basically collapsed. He's like, we lost 20% of our employees. We lost all this momentum. I thought I had systems in place. He's like, the only system I can tell you to set up, Pace, that will actually work for you is a stream of rental properties. That's the only system you can legitimately set up because it has very little to do with employees. It's duplicatable. It's easy to manage somebody and their payments because there's legalities around it, right? Mm-hmm. Where somebody doesn't pay you, you kick them out.
Yep.
That's it.
So
true.
Yes,
is it a pain? Yeah, but you know what? You also get employees that you pay a salary to or a base or whatever, and after 30 days they're not working, you don't get that money back. There's no legalities. In fact, there's things that protect the employee. So we've grown our business in a way that now I'd say 50% of our transactions going forward are going to be rental or subject to transactions because we work entirely way too hard to be in a position in 2 or 3 years where we're still doing wholesale. I'd like to do wholesale as a hobby in 2 or 3 years, but not as a main income stream.
Well, you are on pace to do amazing things. Respect everything you do, the human being you are, what you put out there, the stuff you give back. I look forward to watching, and someday I'll get on the list to come for a ride along. It'll be a lot of fun.
Oh, I would love that. I'd love to hang out. Next time you're in Phoenix, whether it's for a seminar or something, let's hang out. We'll go hang out for the whole day. We'll go to projects, and I really, really appreciate you having me on the show. Thank you so much.
You got it, man. Thanks for your time. Enjoy the day.
Thank you so much. See ya.
See ya.